Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Hi there, how's it going? Good. So I want to invite anyone. We have a lot of seats up front, and if you would like to sit up front, you'll probably hear me better. I'm going to try to use this thing, but I also tend to gesture wildly. So if I go in and out, just give me a symbol, or feel free. We've got plenty of seats up front here, and you've got a minute while I go through some housekeeping real quick. So welcome. It's good to be here. This is the myth-busting session, how to challenge assumptions to make better product decisions. Thank you for joining us at the 11th Annual Denver Startup Week. Thank you particularly to our title sponsors, Amazon, Capital One Cafe, Dell for Startups, and the Downtown Denver Partnership. This session is part of the product track, sponsored by Pi Insurance. This is one of 8 programming tracks aimed at supporting the entire entrepreneurial team. By attending this session, you're agreeing to follow our code of conduct, as well as to being photographed and recorded on video. And be sure to share your experiences online, especially if they're good ones, using the DEN Startup Week hashtag. And I just also want to continue to appreciate all the sponsors, because these are companies and people that make all of this possible. All right, so again, this track is myth busting, how to challenge assumptions and make better product decisions. My name is Ben Klang. I'm Vice President of Business Technology at Power Home Remodeling. And before we get started, I want to introduce you a little bit to Power. Really quick show of hands. Anyone heard of Power? All right, a few of you. That's actually more than I expected. Oh, the ones wearing the Power logoed shirts, that's a giveaway. That's all right. Most of our customers have never heard of us either until we actually come out and do work with them. So not too surprising. So if you don't know Power, we are the nation's largest residential exterior remodeler. And now you're probably wondering, what is a large company that does residential remodeling doing at Denver Startup Week? And what I would say to that is a few things. So first of all, we still are a fairly small group of people, despite the size of the organization. And we're also past startup mode, clearly, but we're very much in a growth mode. So we open 1 to 2 new territories every year. We have 18 locations across the entire country. In the last 5 years, we've doubled our revenue, and in the last 12 years, we've 10x'd the revenue. So a lot of growth over the last 12 years. And with that, we still have that real startup mentality, and we like to challenge all kind of assumptions, because I think a lot of this success has come from being able to disrupt. So, on the exterior, we're a home remodeling company. That was a bad pun. But on the interior, we're more of a people and technology company. And within Power, we have a pretty large department of technology people, 200 people now within our business technology department. And those people run the entire range of skills. It's full service. So we have developers, we have user experience designers, we have QA testers, we have application support, we have Scrum Masters, and of course we have product professionals. So that's where we are today. It's hard to believe we're almost to 200 now. When I joined Power 7 years ago, we only had under 20 people on the team. So just a tremendous amount of growth in the last few years. Now, prior to coming to Power, I also want to let you know a little bit about my personal background. Prior to Power, I ran a consulting company. We did a lot of consulting with companies who wanted to create a strategy for communication, building communication into their apps. And we also implemented a lot of those ideas that we generated working with them. So that's where I come from. And a little bit about this talk. So if you're approximately my age, you may remember a pretty cool show. It's one of my favorites. It was called Mythbusters. And every week, these two guys, Adam and Jamie, and their lovable ragtag group of really brilliant people would go and set about dispelling some myth. It could be anything from if you fire a frozen chicken into an aircraft windshield, will it break more than if you fire a thawed chicken into a windshield? We're not going to be firing any birds of any kind today. But what I love about the show is the idea that there's some myth, and then they test it to see whether or not it holds true. And so, with apologies to Adam and Jamie, I would like to talk about some myths that we've encountered building product. We're going to challenge 10 of them. I think a lot of the things we're going to talk about today are the kind of thing where you believe these things to be true because they're conventional wisdom, or maybe you haven't really thought about it. Maybe these are things that you don't even realize that you believe them to be true. I think these sort of invisible beliefs are exactly the kind of things we should be looking at to make better product decisions. Now, as a quick background, if it isn't clear, my background is in software products, and so a lot of my experience will come from that world. But I think regardless of what product you work in, even if it's physical or whatever, these concepts really do translate. All right, so with that, let's get into myth number 1. You believe that buying software is faster than building it. All right, this is probably going to seem like a strange place to start if we're talking about product people that build things. But if you'll indulge me, I want to tell you a little bit about my day job and explain why I think this is relevant. So at Power, we have an application that powers the entire business. And I do mean the entire business, not a piece of the business, but the whole thing. So much of it that we call Nitro our business operating system. And to give you an idea of what I mean by that, I'm going to talk about some of the capabilities that Nitro has. So first, it generates estimates, everything to do with the sales process. When we visit homeowners in the home, we'll deliver the sales presentation on an iPad that's running Nitro. We will collect all the product options, the styles, the colors. We'll get all that information in and use that to generate the estimate. And then basically the entire sales process from that point forward is managed inside the app. Now, of course, if you have estimates, you probably have customers, so Nitro is also our CRM, or customer relationship management platform. So it knows everything about our customers. When we first meet them, we know when and where we met them. We know their phone number, their email address, the address of their home. We know every time we communicate with them. Every phone call is recorded and logged in the system, so we can see that full communication history. We know what products they're interested in and when they purchase from us. So we have a really rich view of everything that happens inside the business. Now, once we've sold something, we have to install it, and we have to keep track of it. So we have warehouses that have material. Nitro is also our inventory system. It tracks every unique item that we order that's, say, a window manufactured to specific dimensions, but it could also be stock material like nails or roofing material or siding. And I'll talk more about the inventory system in a future myth. We also do a lot of financing. So most homeowners who do work with us, we have a saying that people don't wake up expecting to buy windows, and they may not have the money in the checking account to buy new windows that day. So a lot of homeowners, we work with them to get them financing. We work with a bunch of lending partners that can make that possible based on different homeowners' specific circumstances. So we collect a credit app, and we process those transactions through Nitro as well. Now, everything I've talked about depends on people, and so Nitro has a lot of capabilities around people, starting with candidates, people who want to come work at Power. If you submit an application to work at Power, we will collect your resume and the application you're applying for and submit that to a hiring manager. Then we'll be able to schedule an interview with you, and we'll send you follow-up emails. We'll collect notes on that entire interaction. Hopefully we can make an offer and you decide to come work with us. We'll send you an offer letter. All of that, tracking the candidate throughout their life cycle, that happens in Nitro. Once you come work at Power, then you have a career. So now you've got a career history to think about. You've got transition to different territories or promotions, or if you start a family and you take leave, all of that is tracked through Nitro. Learning and development. So usually there's a right way to do something. Nitro has tools to educate people on the best practices, whether anything from safety to videos that show the best way to deliver a certain kind of information. A lot of that is built into Nitro as well. And you have workforce to schedule. So when you do an installation, you need an entire crew. You can't just show up with half the people. Or if you have a contact center, you have to make sure you have enough people to support the scheduling needs of how many calls you plan to take. So Nitro schedules all that as well. Obviously, if you're going to take time off, we'll put that in Nitro as well. And one of the frontiers for us is actually customer self-service. So the ability for homeowners to see an internal view of their project, called the pizza tracker. Right? You can see when you order your windows how they're going through manufacturing, they're being delivered, they're being installed, et cetera. Okay, so my point here isn't to brag about how big Nitro is. My point is all of this stuff, 100% of it was built in-house. It was built by our developers. We had the choice of buying each of these components. We could have bought an inventory tracking system. We could have bought an HRIS. Could have definitely bought a CRM system like Salesforce. But when we looked at those possibilities, we realized that that would end up putting our data in a whole bunch of little islands. And there may be an initial benefit to get up and running quickly, but long term we would have faced a lot of operational challenges. It would be hard to pull reporting across the entire organization. You'd have people information over here and sales information over here. From a user experience, it's terrible. You've got lots of different passwords to keep track of and expire. From a support standpoint, it's difficult. From a cost standpoint, it's difficult. By building all of this ourselves, we actually have control over all of our data end to end. And that really becomes important when it's time for the business to evolve, which if you've been doing this for any amount of time, you know the only thing that is constant is change. So as the business evolves, we have the ability to move our software to wherever the business is going. Instead of wrapping our business around whatever software we purchased, we wrap the software around the business. And that has enabled us to do all kinds of things much more quickly than we would have had we purchased software. So I don't think that buying is always the right answer. We have a pretty strong belief that building is the right answer. So I'm going to propose that buying software is not necessarily faster than building. All right, that's how this is going to go. Let's go to number 2. Myth number 2. I like this one. So you believe that you're working toward a finish line. When I first started building out the product practice at Power, I was interviewing people to be product managers, or what we call producteers. And a lot of the resumes that I got were people who had a project management background. They would come and we'd talk about all their experience, and they would talk about the detailed plans that they would build and what they would deliver as a result of those. And as I talked to them, it occurred to me that there was a gap between the way they thought about the work they were doing and the way that I thought about product. And it occurred to me there's a difference between a project and a product. So I came up with this analogy of a deck. Let's imagine you've got a beautiful home, but it lacks a deck, and you really would like to have a deck. So you draft up some plans, and you figure out how much wood you need, and you start to decide which side of the house the stairs are going to go off of, and maybe you're going to put the grill over here and the flower pots on this back wall, and definitely going to get some string lights, maybe replace the sliding glass door with some French doors. You're going to figure all this out, and then you're going to build it. And when you're done building it, you have a deck, and it's beautiful, but you're probably not going to keep building it. You're probably just going to enjoy it. And that's project mentality. There's a finish line. You're done with it. With product, I think it's really the opposite of that. First of all, we don't wait for everything to be done to launch a product. We launch it as soon as it's ready. And even more importantly, as soon as you launch it, you're not done. It's really just the beginning. Now you start evolving the product. You start getting feedback from people who are using it about more capabilities that they want it to have, or you start to fix issues where you didn't totally anticipate how it would be used. Really, if you think about it, a product doesn't have a finish line. It continues its life, and you continue evolving it and supporting it and enhancing it for as long as it has users, which could be forever. So a story from our own experience doing this. A few years ago, we had an onboarding process, about 5 years ago. If you showed up to work on your first day at work at Power, we would hand you a stack of documents about 17 pages thick, and we would ask you to very nicely write your name at the top 17 times, and then write your signature at the bottom 17 times, and in the middle fill out all of the details that we need to collect. And then you'd hand your papers back to the front desk, and they would scan them in on a scanner, and then we would email them off, and then we would take those 17 pages you just lovingly crafted and drop them in a shredder. And that's not a great experience for anybody. All that information is still analog, essentially, and the end result of all that paper is a bunch of confetti. So we knew we needed to improve that. And we thought, this will be easy. We know exactly the information we're collecting. Literally, we have forms that we just need to digitize. We also know where in the organization all of that information is going. Some of it goes to HR, some of it goes to payroll, some of it goes to hiring managers, but it's really easy to trace that all out. So we thought, great, we'll build this, we'll launch it, and we'll be done with onboarding. So we did. Took about 6 months, digitized everything, tested it, launched it. Now when you show up at Power, you get an iPad, you type in your name one time, and you sign your employment agreement, and you hit submit, and you're done. We thought we were good. But then somebody said, well, that's great. You just handled all of our full-time employees. We have a whole bunch of people who are contractors, and they don't sign the same employment agreement, and they don't get the same offer letters. So, okay, we need to fix that. No problem. We'll add some more capabilities to it, figure out which title you belong to in the system, and you get a different flow. So we finished that, and they said, that's great, but we have some contractors who are not based in the United States, and their phone numbers don't look like our phone numbers, and their street address don't look like our street addresses, and the system isn't supporting those. All right, no problem. We'll add that. No big deal. And then we heard, well, that's awesome, but we have a really big veterans program where we hire veterans transitioning out of active military service. And what's really interesting about that program is they aren't actually our employees during that transitional period. They remain employees of the federal government, but they still come and work with us during that period. Well, their onboarding is totally different, and the timing in which they get their different agreements is different. So we had to modify onboarding to take that into account. Now, wouldn't you know it, by the time we got through all of that, we looked at our process and we realized that the company handling our background checks really wasn't meeting our needs. And now we wanted to switch out the company that's doing background checks. So we have an opportunity to look at the APIs all over again and see what capabilities there are. So if you think about it, we've been building it this entire time for the last 5 years. And I don't expect it to stop. I think the business will evolve. We'll have new types of workers. We'll have new regulatory compliance items. We'll have new systems that we want to support. That product is now something we'll support forever. So yeah, there is no finish line. Even for something as seemingly simple as collecting paperwork, there's a lot more to it than that. All right, myth number 3. You believe that you need to make everyone happy. Wouldn't we all? I mean, don't we come to work hoping to make people happy? And isn't it human nature to want to make people happy? I think when you think about what your product should do, it won't ever make everybody happy. And if that's your goal, you'll probably fail. There are some people who just fundamentally look at the problem you're trying to solve with a different perspective, and they don't agree with how you've chosen to solve that problem. You'll probably never make those people happy. And there are other people for whom the problem you're solving isn't really worth enough for them to pay for it. It's just not a big enough problem. You'll never make them happy either. So any energy you invest in trying to solve their problems isn't going to make the difference in the success or failure of your product. It's just not making them happy. So I want to tell you a story. I'll be honest, it's a little bit of a sad story, but it's okay. We're all still here. Earlier in my career, I ran a company that I talked about the consultancy and I talked about telecom strategy. We built developer tools. We saw an opportunity to make the phone call experience not suck. If you've ever called FedEx and you would speak your tracking number and it would, and it'd come up with your package, that was the kind of thing that we could build. And I thought that was really cool because a lot of companies, your phone systems are generally terrible and you navigate a maze of craziness and you end up with an agent who has no idea who you are, even though you typed in your account number twice. So we went and we built this thing, and one of our first customers was a company that did a lot of telephone marketing, telephone surveys. So you'd go to the dentist and you'd get a follow-up survey to ask about your experience. This would be the company that would call you and collect the results. And we worked with their development team. We built some really slick features, a lot of speech recognition, a lot of text-to-speech synthesis. We made it so that there was automated load testing and functional testing built in, so you could run a command and it would tell you, whether the thing behaved correctly. And we even built this really great logging mechanism, so you could see exactly how the application was performing, and the configuration system was self-documenting. I mean, as a developer, this really got our engines going, right? It's really fun. But after about a year of building all this stuff, I got called into my customer's office, the CTO, and he was not happy because we had essentially gone a year, but we hadn't actually turned on this new thing we were building. And he was upset. And the reason he was upset is because all of that stuff that I built for his development team wasn't solving his main problem. It turns out his real problem was that they had built their entire business on a commercial product that charged them every time they handled a phone call through their system. Now, in the early days, that wasn't such a big deal because every time they handle a phone call, they're making money. But that also means as they scale, their costs are scaling with their growth. And he didn't want that anymore. So what he wanted was a system that would displace as quickly as possible their legacy system. And I missed that. I didn't see it. So in the end, he brought that team in-house and we lost that project. But it taught me a really valuable lesson, which is you got to figure out who to make happy and do it for the right reasons. So don't try to make everybody happy. All right, myth number 4. This is kind of related, right? This is also along the idea of know your customer. So I think most of us probably think we know who your customer is. So I'm going to challenge you for a minute, and you probably are going to look at me like I'm an idiot. That's okay. Some of us have customers. It's really pretty straightforward. The customer is, you're selling a direct-to-consumer model. You've got an app or a service, and people swipe their credit card and they pay you. That's a really straightforward thing. But when you work in enterprise, maybe that's not quite so obvious. When I was still working with that same company, the telecom thing, we had a project. Someone asked us to help them build a tool that would unify their entire operation. So they had essentially a hosted contact center package. And they had built it by buying a whole bunch of different pieces of software. They had a billing package, and they had a customer support package, and they had a dashboard for reporting of call stats, and they had a user management portal. And all of these things had different usernames and passwords, and the customer experience was pretty fractured and pretty broken. And my first meeting was with the CTO. Now, the CTO was a really smart guy, a friend of mine, very experienced, knew his stuff. Also, one of those people who's really opinionated. You may have run into somebody like this somewhere along the way. His opinions were that everything I was doing was wrong technically. So he was a Python guy, and he thought that everything had to be written in Python, and my company mostly wrote Ruby, and his opinion of Ruby was that it was slow and bloated and couldn't possibly scale. And he wanted nothing to do with what we would build. But I had another meeting with his boss, who was the CEO. And when I listened to what the CEO had to say, I learned my lesson from the past example, and I heard what he really wanted. He wanted the ability to have a single place to log in and a single interface that managed all these disparate systems so that the customer experience would be solid. I also knew that my team could deliver that quickly. We had a lot of tools built up around that. Ruby is kind of known for being able to prototype quickly. So I said, give me a couple weeks. We'll bring you a functional prototype, and you can tell us what you think. Well, as you might guess, we built it, got in front of him, and he was very happy with it. And then over his CTO's objections, we were able to launch it. So in that case, if I had listened to the CTO and had tried to build it in Python, we might have been able to do it. I definitely would not have been able to do it quickly. I can't guarantee what the outcome would have looked like. But by knowing what was actually important to the success of the project, knowing my customer, which in this case was the CEO, we were able to get much closer to what we needed to be. All right, so know your customer. All right, let's go to myth number 5. You believe that your users know what they need. I gotta be careful because I got coworkers in the room. All right, so very often a conversation will start and somebody will say, I just need a button on the page that does this, or I just wish the app could do that. And if you think about it, a lot of the people that you work with on a daily basis, your customers, your stakeholders, whatever, they really do understand their world very well. They know the details, they know the pain points because they live it. And it's their job to know the details, right? What they probably spend less time on is the big picture, is how does what they do fit within the bigger universe of how the structure works. And that's fair, right? That's their job. That's what they're supposed to be doing. And that's why you're there as well. You're the one helping them see how all of these things come together and help them guide them toward a product that actually solves their problems. And I think one of the biggest gifts you can give to your customers as a product manager is to hold up a mirror to them as they explain their problem and let them see for themselves how it's a little bit different than maybe they perceive it. So a few weeks ago, I had a meeting with our talent acquisition department, which is a pretty sizable and growing department, and their job is to get qualified candidates in front of hiring managers. It's really important. We're a people business. We have to have the right people in the business. And they scheduled a meeting with me. They said, we want to have a talk about building a dialer. So in a dialer, what that means is they put a listing out on various job websites, and people respond to those listings. And the problem they told me was that they would put out these job postings, and they would get such a huge response that they couldn't actually get through all of them. And what would happen is we would pay for all of these leads, if you will, these people who are interested in working with us, and we wouldn't get to them quickly. By the time we did get to them, they had found another opportunity, and they had taken that instead. And so they thought, okay, all I need to do is I need to call faster. If I can make more phone calls, I can get through that list, and we will get through, we'll get all the value out of our job postings. And I said, well, that's interesting, but tell me what happens when you get them on the phone? And they said, well, that's interesting. It's actually another problem we have. We have a really hard time getting them on the phone. First of all, when we call them, they don't recognize the number. And so a lot of times they just don't answer. So now I have to leave a voicemail and hope that they call back and we can have another conversation in the future. So it's really hard to even get them on the phone in the first place. Or maybe I call them and they're still working somewhere, and I've called them in the middle of the day because that's when we're working. And they can't talk, right? They're in a meeting or whatever. So now I've got to reschedule time with them. And again, I'm wasting time and essentially making 2 phone calls. Or even worse, we talk to them, we have an initial conversation, and we realize they aren't really qualified for the position. We have some things, there's some basic requirements like, are you authorized to work in the United States? Or do you have a driver's license for some of our positions that we have company vehicles? If we could get that out of the way ahead of time, those are people that just aren't right for that position. We don't really want to spend time talking to them right now. So as we talked about it, we realized that making more phone calls wasn't really what they wanted. What they wanted was a way to have better phone calls. And we came up with 3 ideas that will address that problem more specifically. So the first is, when a candidate will submit an application, we can actually use that as an opportunity right away to ask some screening questions. Based on the job they're applying for, we can put questions in front of them where we can say, do you have a driver's license? Do you have this specific requirement? And right away, the recruiter can tell whether this is a conversation you need to follow up on or send them a letter that says, sorry, but not right now. The second thing we did was we will allow them to pick a time when they submit their application. So tell us what time is best for you. Do you want us to call you at 6 o'clock on Tuesday? Do you want us to call us noon on Wednesday? And so what that sets up is an expectation that when we do call them, they'll be available, that they'll have time to talk with us, and that they'll be expecting our call. It won't be out of the blue. And the third thing we did was send text messages. This is a really simple thing. Hey, it's Power. Thanks for submitting your application. We look forward to speaking to you tomorrow at 11. Just a reminder, this is the phone number we'll be calling from, so that when that call comes through, suddenly it's not an unknown number. Now it's the person I know I want to have a conversation with. So by doing these 3 things, we're actually making better use of those people's time. We're having more conversations. We're having the right conversations. And nowhere in there is an automated dialer, just not the right technology. So your users are smart. It's really important to listen to them. But what I would encourage you is listen to what they're not saying. Really try to look at their process with them, understand why they do what they do, and then design something that fits the problems they actually have. All right. Myth number 6. You believe that you need the cloud to scale. So you might be wondering why I'm talking about the cloud and scaling when we're in a product management talk. And what I would like to propose is that being a product manager is much more about just collecting a list of features. There's also the environment that your app runs in, and that environment has to be suitable for your application to be successful. So I want to do a quick aside and talk about how we conceive of the product position at Power. So we have these various roles within business technology. We have, first of all, our site reliability engineering team. This is their logo. And these people are experts in infrastructure. They know all about storage. They know all about networking. They know all about compute. They're the ones that we turn to when we have questions about, can something scale? Can it be reliable 24/7? How will we back it up and restore in case of a disaster? We also have a really, really strong user experience team. These people are like one part designer, graphic designer, one part psychologist, and one part developer. And they apply all those skills to find the best way for the humans to interact with the computer. And by the way, our UX team are the ones that design these pins, which are really cool. We actually turn them into metal pins that we give away. Pretty neat. All right, whoops. The next category is Scrum Masters. So we need people to take care of the process. How do we set goals and make sure that we hit those goals? How do we make sure that our teams are operating efficiently, that communication is happening, and that if somebody gets blocked, how do we unblock them? This is the team responsible for that. They facilitate the meetings, they make sure the retrospectives happen. Those are the Scrum Masters. And the fourth category is the obvious one, developers. We need people to actually write the code that turns ideas into functioning applications. So as we were building these pins, I asked the product group for ideas. Give me some kind of metaphor that explains what you do. And one of the guys on my team, Steve, he said, sometimes I feel like a conductor. Like there's a symphony and my job is to get the best performance out of it. And I thought that was a brilliant explanation for it. Product group, they're not really experts in any of these one domains, but what they're really good at is bringing the best out of each one of them and working them in harmony to get a product that is successful. Okay, so how does that apply to running in the cloud? Well, I think a lot of us assume that we need a cloud to scale, right? It's kind of, it's almost an assumption. Well, we're gonna launch this in EC2 and it'll be taken care of. And there's some truth to that, right? There are some companies where they run an ad on Good Morning America and suddenly they have 5 million users that they didn't have yesterday and they need that kind of immediate scale. I think for most people that's not the case. Power has had a tremendous amount of growth in the last 10 years, almost hockey stick kind of growth. And even with that kind of growth, our growth was still predictable. We could see it coming, at least with enough foresight to be able to plan ahead for it. By choosing to do that, by choosing to build our own infrastructure, we had a couple of really great benefits. One of which is we weren't locked into any vendor. We could go wherever we wanted and get whatever technology from whoever we needed, and we could do it whenever we needed to. It also enabled us to be much more aware of the costs of operating the product. So one of the, I think, big risks you run with cloud is you go purchase storage and you buy it by consumption, right? So you spin up some servers here, you store a bunch of data over here, and your bill just kind of increases month over month. And it becomes really hard to see where your costs are actually going. Well, that can be a problem, right? Because 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you've built up all this stuff and you don't know what you can reclaim to save money on your operating costs. For us, we have a variety of systems we purchased over the years, one of which we purchased in 2015, and it was our storage system for our production infrastructure. And it did that job for 5 years until we upgraded and went to flash storage. But when we did that, we didn't throw that hardware away. Then we moved that to be our archive tier. We moved a whole bunch of old videos down to that. So I have this piece of equipment I bought in 2015 that I have long since paid for, right? Amortized over 7 years at this point, and I'm only paying for spare parts at this point. It's essentially free. I don't have to pay for that. If all of that was in the cloud, that 500 gigabytes or whatever, 500 terabytes of whatever it is, I'd be paying that to Amazon each month instead. And I haven't had any scalability problems. So in the beginning, the production application in 2008 ran on a server underneath somebody's desk. Obviously didn't leave it there very long. As it became important, we built a rack in a climate-controlled room, and then as we outgrew that, we built an actual data center with 8 cabinets in it, and then we built a second location, and we're actually right now building our third location. But the point is, through all that time, we have been easily able to keep up with scale. And it has enabled us to be much more picky about what technology we use, and I think it's been much more efficient cost-wise as well. So it's not to say that you don't need the cloud, but I don't think you need it to scale necessarily. All right. Myth number 7. You believe that deadlines are important. All right, so please don't take out a picture of this and send it to your boss and say, but Ben said deadlines aren't important. All right, this is, I admit, this is a little bit link baity. My idea here isn't that deadlines aren't important. It's that I think deadlines aren't important in the way that we use them. For a lot of organizations, we sit down and we figure out what it is we want to do. We're going to build this new product. It's going to have this long list of features. And to take advantage of announcements and market forces, we're going to launch by this specific date. Great. When that date approaches, as it inevitably does, you're not quite there. And it's looking like you're not going to make it. So under sort of a traditional deadline model, one of a few things happens. Maybe you drive your team really hard on the mission, and you get them to perform heroics, and they work 20-hour days to deliver it. I've been in that position. And it's sort of exciting, but after a while, you deliver that deadline, and then right behind it, there's another deadline. And behind that, there's another deadline. And that's the path to burnout. It's hard to push a team that hard, that long. But maybe they're not as mission-focused, and maybe what ends up happening is they kind of rush to get things done, and things don't quite work right from the beginning. Or even worse, you go to launch day, and a critical piece is missing, or outright doesn't work. And now you've got egg on your face because it didn't work right. What I would like to propose is that instead of thinking of deadlines as a hard and fast, we're going to launch it, come hell or high water, we instead look at it as a way to focus. What's actually important? What's going to make the difference in the success of our product? So I'll give you an example. At the beginning of 2021, we decided to reimagine our in-home sales process. And we came up with a new product that we call Home Tour. Home Tour was going to replace its predecessor, the previous Estimate Builder, which was originally written in 2011, so it had survived for quite a long time. And it did everything it was supposed to do, right? It lets you come up with an estimate and select all the product options. But it had a couple of drawbacks. One of the drawbacks is that it was fairly slow. And by slow, what I mean is every time you made a product selection, that click would send a request to the server to process the click and then send you back a menu of additional options. Well, that worked great at home while you're sitting in the building. But if you are in somebody's home that's maybe outside of the city, or you're crawling around in the basement trying to get the dimensions of a basement hopper window, and there's no cell service in the basement, suddenly that becomes a really difficult task. And a lot of the feedback we got was that the current estimator was too slow. We also wanted to capture photos because we were getting ready to build that customer service portal I was talking about. And we felt like the photos would be a really important part of engaging with homeowners, to be able to see their home and what it would become. So we knew that we wanted to take this opportunity, reimagining estimate process, to capture those photos as we go. We also knew that looking at the sales process, there are things that we wanted to do, like be able to generate a summary at the end of the experience and say, this is all the stuff we've talked about. These are the selections you've made. Does everything look like what you expected? We could do a price comparison. So we could say, this is how our product stacks up against our competitors. And we're really competitive with a great quality product. We could build all that into, because they were doing that on paper today. And there's just a laundry list of other things that we felt like reimagining the sales process we could do. So we laid all that out. And we got started. We got started at the beginning of 2021, and we got into sort of late summer, early fall. And we found that, as it turns out, working on an 11-year-old system takes a little bit more time than we thought. We might use the word tech debt. There were some things that we've accumulated over 11 years of doing this that we had to remember how it worked, and we had to adapt it to this new system. And it became really clear we were not going to get to our launch date, which was set for January of the following in January of 2022. We weren't going to hit it. Now, instead of just doubling down and deciding to get everything done, we use this as an opportunity to really look at this hard. What was it that was going to make this product successful? What were the things that we had to have, and what were the things that we could keep doing the way we were doing, and it would not take away from the success of the product? And when we got down to it, it was really just two things. It was making it fast. It had to be fast. We knew that if it wasn't fast, people would not want to use it. They would continue to use the old system. And the second thing was the photos. We had to capture the photos. If we had the photos, then we knew we would set ourselves up for the success of the future product, which was the customer service portal. And all that other stuff, the summary screen, the price comparison, the one-year price, we had all these other features that we were going to build. All of that stuff, we would do it, but it would come later. And that's what we did. We were able to launch it on time. We kept our deadline of January, had it launched to one territory. And while they were testing it in the field, we used that time to add back in some of the stuff that we knew we wanted to have, so that when we launched it to the entire company 3 months later, it really had just about everything we needed. So my point with that is that the deadlines themselves are useful, but not as not as the stick, but rather as a way to focus, to cut away the stuff that won't make the difference and focus on the things that really will make the difference in the success of your product. All right, myth number 8. You believe that the loudest voice needs attention first. You might also phrase this as the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? And I would like to propose to you that you should not grease the squeaky wheel, at least not right away. Okay, so anytime you're managing a product, I think one of the sort of fundamental skills is prioritization. What are we going to do first and why? And as I've thought about this over the years, I've come to sort of categorize things into one of 5 buckets. And I want to talk to you about the way I think about the kinds of stories that we have. So the first kind of story that we have in our backlog is an objective story. I also refer to this as a North Star. This is the stuff you're really excited about. This is what you want to be doing. You wake up in the morning, I'm going to move my product forward. This is the problem we're going to solve. The stories in this category carry you toward that goal. You should have a mission. This is following that mission. In an ideal world, you'll spend most of your time building these stories. But we don't live in an ideal world. We live in the real world. And we have bugs, sorry to say. I don't think they're going to go away. Until someone manages to invent a system where you can't build bugs, we're going to always have bugs. So at least at Power, we place a lot of emphasis on fixing bugs. The way we look at features is every time we launch a feature, we're making a promise, a commitment to the people who use the product that what we delivered will work as advertised, and it will continue to work the way we designed it. And if either of those things isn't true, it's on us to fix it. We think that's really important because that's trust, right? That's as people use the system, if it works the way it's supposed to, they trust us. They continue to invest in supporting the product, and they don't look elsewhere to solve their needs, right? So objective stories are very important, but we have to fix bugs. And our general rule is we put them at the top of the next sprint, so we'll get to them as quickly as we can. All right, the third kind of story, refer to this as filler. So this is all of the really good ideas, the things that have business value, the things that are worth doing, but they don't necessarily take you toward your objective. They're good to have, and they're not broken necessarily, but they're things that people are asking for. And I think the critical thing here is that they delight, right? They make people really excited to use your product. Good examples of this would be maybe you finish a bunch of features, but you didn't totally finish out the design. Like you still have some leftover UX notes that you want to go and address. That would be good filler work. Or maybe it's adding some extra functionality, one more column to a report, or an extra button that performs an action that somebody had to go to a different screen. Little stuff like that. That it has value, it's worth doing, but it's not necessarily the main problem you're trying to solve. Because it makes people happy at Power, we sometimes call this candy. And everybody loves candy, right? When you get candy, you're happy. But just like candy, if you eat too much of it, you get fat, and it slows you down. So the critical thing here is you got to balance it against your objectives and your bugs, right? You should do filler, and actually we use it strategically. As we move from milestone to milestone, when we wrap up one milestone, rather than running headlong to the next one, we leave slack, because there's always something that's going to come up right after a launch. So we'll load filler work in that period, which makes people happy, but it also leaves room that we can cut it if we need to focus on bugs at that point. All right, the fourth category, meteors. If you don't like bugs, you're going to hate meteors. Meteors are the stuff that you have to do. You don't have a choice. Maybe it threatens your existence, like the dinosaurs, or maybe the business can't continue to operate without doing it. Good examples of this would be like Congress waking up one morning and deciding to change the law around tax credits, and that fundamentally changes your pricing model. That happened to us. We have things like partners who have new compliance rules that come into effect for them. And so now they need all of our homeowners to sign new contracts. And if we don't get those contracts signed, then we can't work with that partner. If you don't do these things, the fundamental process of your business breaks down. You got to do them. Nobody wants to do them, but you have to do them to survive. So obviously you want to spend as little time on here as you have to, but you can't help it when they occur. You don't have any control when they pop up. You just got to deal with them. That's a meteor. All right, the fifth category is stuff. So now we're back to squeaky wheel territory. This is all the stuff that people ask for. And if you've spent time around users, every time you meet one, they'll say, oh, wouldn't it be great if it could do this? Can I just have this one extra feature? And you go, hey, that could work. I'll be a good product manager. I'll put that in my backlog, and we'll think about it next time we get around to it. But a large number of these things are sort of, they're not quite filler. They don't solve a big problem. They're not going to make a lot of people happy. It might scratch one person's itch, or it might make something like 5% easier, but they're not really worth doing. And they don't carry you toward your objective. They're not repairing any critical functionality. And certainly if you don't do it, the business is not going to fail, right? So I do have another word for this. I do sometimes call it shit. And here's the thing. I don't want to spend any time doing this. If I'm spending time here, I'm not doing the things that are actually essential to my product being successful. So there is a category for this, and it's the only one I don't prioritize. It's the only one I try to push out of the way, remove from the backlog, don't even think about it. All right, so that's the thing. If you've got a lot of squeaky wheels, it could be filler. I'm not saying it's not, but look at it carefully. If it's just one person who has kind of a hobby horse and they're distracting you from the goal, then it's just loudest and you don't necessarily have to pay attention to it. All right, myth number 9. We're almost done. You believe that you need more to be good enough. So most of us in this room, we're product people, I would assume, or at least interested in product. And we probably heard of this idea of minimum viable product. And it's something I subscribe to myself. I think it's a great idea. Fundamentally, the idea is that the minimum viable product is just enough product that somebody will pay you for it. That's really it. I think the trap that a lot of us fall into is that what we think of as minimum is actually way more than minimum really is. So to give you an example of this, 3 years ago, we decided that we needed to start running our own warehouses. So prior to this point, all of our inventory, all of the stuff that we would install in people's homes, they lived in the warehouses of our suppliers and of our manufacturing partners. And that was great because it meant we didn't have to operate it, but it had some drawbacks. Let's imagine that one week we had a lot of roofing projects to install, and wouldn't you know it, they didn't have enough roofing on hand, and we couldn't tell, right? Because we placed the order and they say we can't fulfill it. Or, I think I mentioned all of the windows that we purchase, they're all manufactured to specific dimensions, so they're unique. You can't just grab a window off the shelf. You have to grab the window for that opening in that home. And what would happen is our manufacturing partners, a window might have 20 homes on it. A home might have 20 windows on it. And we would get 19 of those windows in. And come installation date, we would have 19 of 20 windows, but we wouldn't know that. And so now we've got a really uncomfortable call to make. We call the homeowner and say, we're so sorry, we got to reschedule. We're waiting on one more window. Wouldn't it be better to know that ahead of time so they don't have to take time off of work and miss their day, right? Okay, so we decided to solve that problem. We're going to start putting all that in our own warehouses. We're going to get our own space. We're going to track inventory. We're going to manage all this stuff, and we'll make it better. Here's the thing, though. We want to launch it in 3 months. Now, we did a little bit of research, and we looked at what warehouse management systems can do, and they can do a lot, right? So integration with barcode scanners, so you can kind of zap the package and know exactly what that thing is. You can map out the warehouse, and you can build 2D or even 3D maps that show you all the locations, and you can see how full each location is and whether there's room in the warehouse for more inventory. You can do reorder points. So as you run low on a particular material, the system can alert you, hey, it's time to order more nails. Or even better, have it integrated with the order tracking system so you can project. Oh, well, 2 weeks from now we have a lot of roofing to do. Let's make sure we get more roofing in ahead of time. And then for the bean counters, being able to tell how much dollar amount we have in inventory is really important. From an insurance perspective and from a cash flow perspective, being able to report on what's in the warehouse was a pretty key feature. So we looked at all this, and well, we have 3 months. We're not going to do all that. It's just not possible. But we used the deadline to focus. And what we boiled it down to is the most important thing was really just one thing, at least to get started. We wanted to be able to receive something in the warehouse and put it somewhere, and then when the time came, be able to go get that thing back out again. Have you ever seen Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark? At the end, they bury the Ark of the Covenant like some miles deep in the warehouse? I don't know if you haven't seen it. Great movie. But the point is, warehouses can be big, and it's very easy to lose things. So the key feature for us was to put stuff away and get it back out again. And so that's what we did. When on day one when it launched, and it did launch 3 months later, it was a bare bones. When the truck backed up to loading dock, we pulled the window off. We hand keyed the barcode into the app, and the app would say, oh, well, that's for the Clang project. Go stick that in location 1. And then the next window would come out and it said, oh, that's for the Clang project, stick that in location 2. And the third window, oh, that's also for the Clang project, stick that also in location 1. So all of our projects became organized by project. All the windows became organized by project. It was very easy to find them. And then sure enough, as the installation crew came, we knew we were to go get the Clang windows, and we would stick them on their truck, and off they'd go. It did not do any reporting. It did not do any tracking of inventory levels. It did not have a map. It didn't do any dollar amounts. All it did was, and didn't even do a barcode scanner at that point. But it launched. And here's the thing. By launching quickly, we immediately started learning things about what was important in warehouse management. And most importantly, we had buy-in, right? The people using the system saw that we were solving their problem. We were responsive to their needs. And they didn't try to go out and buy another piece of software. They continued using Nitro and investing in that platform. And sure enough, as the months followed, we weren't done. We continued to add more on. We added, one of the first things we added was barcode scanners, because it's a pain typing 12-digit serial numbers into an iPhone. And then we added inventory tracking and forecasting. So we could say, well, we know we need to order some window materials. And then we added reporting for accounting, so they would know what the dollar amount was. And we added all these things over the years, as well as integration with installation scheduling. So my point here is that if we had tried to build all of that, it would have taken us a year and a half. And during that time, they would have continued to either use the old warehouse system or maybe try to come up with a really crazy spreadsheet thing, which I've seen a lot of those. And all of that takes away from the success of the product. Instead, we launched just enough for it to be successful, and then we kept building. And it wasn't much at all. So you probably believe that you need more than you really do. And that takes us to the end. Myth number 10. You believe everything I've just told you. So I'm not lying to you. It's not like that. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, I'm a guy you've never met before from a company you've never heard of, and I'm telling you all the things that you're doing wrong. All I really want you to take away from this is that it doesn't really, that everything you do is worth looking at. It's worth considering, is this really the best way to do it? And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter whether I'm right or wrong about any of these things. As long as you look at it for yourself, you understand the reality in which you exist, you understand the problems you're trying to solve, what your users really need, and you build a system that best serves those regardless of any preconceived notions that you had. That's it. Thanks. All right, so we have about 5 minutes, 6 minutes for questions. I'd love to hear from any of you if you've had a myth that you busted that you would like to tell us about, or if you want to hear more of my stories. I've got lots of stories. What do you think? Way in the back. Great. All right, let me try to paraphrase that, just make sure I heard you. It sounds like you're asking, we chose to build as opposed to using a software as a service platform, and I think your question was how do our installation crews interact with it? And then continuing that thought, the idea that sometimes it's more expensive to build and it's not practical rather than buy, and sometimes buying something is easier. So first of all, when the myth in my mind was that it was automatically better to buy versus build, and I don't think that's the case. I think buy versus build is a classic debate that will go on forever, and it will always be situation specific. It might very well make more sense for you to buy something than build it, particularly if you don't have a technology capability in-house, right? I think that was one of the big differentiators for us, is we did have a tech team we could turn to, and if you don't have the ability to manage that, then building becomes much more difficult. So part of it is just yes, if buying makes more sense and you know you're doing it for the right reasons, then that is the correct path, and don't let anybody tell you differently. But the other part of it, to answer the more tactical question, even though we built the software, we still deliver it very much like software as a service. It is primarily a web application. We do have a mobile app that we deliver, but it's primarily a web application. And we also we use a lot of cloud technologies. There just happen to be cloud technologies in our own infrastructure. So we use a lot of we use Kubernetes to deliver it, if you remember that. We use a lot of object storage, which is S3 style storage. Most importantly, most people don't need any specific hardware to access the database. They just need access to the application. So we give them a login, and we control, using permissions, what they can see. So depending on your role, you might have access to customer data, or you might not. You might just have access to your schedule for that day. So we deliver it continuously, and it is essentially, if you're on the outside, other than not recognizing the logo, you probably wouldn't know any difference from SaaS like Salesforce. Good question. Yeah? Yes?
Yeah, just following along the same thread, you talked about infrastructure versus the cloud. Your infrastructure team certainly has a cost as well, right?
Yes.
To maintain and get all that work done. But I guess the curious thing for me is at what point in the founding history did you decide that it was important to invest in an infrastructure team? Because it seems like that happened before the cloud decision sort of had to happen, right? I guess, could you go through that story maybe?
Yeah, so just to repeat, you're asking about, we have an infrastructure team, and did that infrastructure team exist before or after we made the decision to stay in the cloud? Is that the
yeah, basically.
Okay.
I'm sort of curious about the decision-making process that
yeah.
went into we decided not to use cloud because we decided to build an infrastructure team. Whether the infrastructure team existed for you beforehand already, or if that was something you had to deeply invest as a hiring strategy. Maybe I just missed it. I came in a little late, but I thought I'd ask about that.
No, that's a great question, and it's, you know what, this is a good one. It's a philosophical question for us. So one of the core things that Power believes, I think, in business technology, but also across the organization, is we like the idea that all of the people and expertise that we need for the business to be successful are inside the company. So if you think about that, there's this idea that if something breaks, we have all the skills on the team to solve that problem. And we're not 17th in line or 17,000th in line when Amazon goes down, right? All the people we need are power employees whose main objective is the success of the company. So philosophically, we were predisposed to that. To your question of did we have the team first or the cloud first, I would say that in the beginning, we were hiring people who understood infrastructure because we needed to support what we had, even minimally, even like everybody has an internet connection. So we had people that could troubleshoot that when it went down, right? I think as we built out that team and we saw success, then it became clearer and clearer that we could do this, that we weren't beholden to the cloud. I can't say whether the chicken came first or the egg came first. I think those two things kind of came together. But fundamentally, the key idea was that all of the pieces that we own and all of the people that we employ that are in our direct control, that's what's going to ensure our success.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes?
Kind of thinking back to the CEO, CTO, Python, Ruby myth, how do you know when you're talking to the right customer, user, stakeholder?
Great question. So how do you know when you're talking to the customer? I think I rehearsed this and I forgot to say it. There's a really easy way to tell who your customer is. It's the one who's signing the check. When it comes down to it, that's what it is. Ultimately, they're making a decision. Now, they will take into account the opinions of the team that's working for them. But the one who's writing the check is the one who understands the real objective and why they're signing the check in the first place. And if you align what you're delivering to that, you'll have better success every time. All right, any other questions? Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Great to have you as an audience.